Hello everybody. Tonight we are in our web project management class. We have actually decided on projects. We have two projects that are running in this face-to-face class. And tonight is the night that we are going to, with at least one of the projects, purchase domain names and hosting. And right now I'm just navigating to my course shell, if you guys are wondering what is he doing. I should have done this before the video started, but I'm doing it after. And the two projects that we actually have going are the two that you see listed here. One for Roman bath soaps, that's for Aaron's dad's business. And then we also have a daycare project that we're working on that probably will not get purchased tonight, but we might do that in the upcoming week. All right, so we have a lot of different considerations to make, and I was kind of polling the class before we started as to how many of them already owned domain names or have worked with real live hosting before. And we do have a few people in the room, but for the most part, which is not unusual for students, is that's something that they don't really delve into because usually there's not a need to do that. When you usually delve into domain names and hosting, it's because you have to. It's like, oh, okay, great, I made a website, now where do I put it and how do people get to it? That's what happens, right? And that's probably the question you get right from day one when you start in the web program. It's like, great, I made a hello world, now what? And well, there's a process. And then eventually you guys learn that we have a web server here on campus that you can connect to and load up your stuff. And yes, it is publicly accessible, and yes, over time it does get indexed by Google, and it is searchable, and it is findable, but it's a school server. So you're not allowed to use it to make money, right? Or do a lot of things you might want to try that our system is just not set up to do, because it's really a basic web server with basic services. All right, so the question I'll put out there is, let's start with some of the basics. And the first question is, what's a domain name? So, Google. Well, according to the dictionary here, it says, the part of a network address that identifies it as belonging to a particular domain. That's really helpful. All right, when we go through these programs here, depending on which program curriculum sheets you're working from, and I know some of you are probably working off of the 2016, 2017 sheets, where the program is called Web Developer, I believe it was called, right? And now it's called Web Software Developer, the new curriculum sheet. And that's not something that Gateway did, that's something that the state of Wisconsin changed on us in order to align all the different programs across all the 16 regions of the state that have technical colleges. So in the newer degree program, we have omitted some classes that were previously included. So if you took the older program sheet and you were following that one to get your degree, on that one you have to take a class called Intro Net Web, right? And that may have been one of your first exposures to HTML, depending on who was teaching it. If you were lucky, you got one of the web people teaching it, so you actually kind of learned web a little bit. But then you also had the networking part of the class, right? And in the networking part of the class, you learned about things like IP addresses, right? So one thing I'm just going to do really quick is I'm just going to bring up a simple command prompt up on the screen to kind of demonstrate a couple of concepts here. First of all, every machine that's connected to a network will have an IP address. And I just typed in a very simple DOS command, not a bad one to note, called ipconfig. And I would assume that most of you have learned this or maybe have seen somebody type it before. But from a command line standpoint, this is how I discover what all my network adapters are, and if they're connected to a network, and if they are connected to a network, what addressing structure and scheme is given to any particular machine. So right now I am hooked up through Wi-Fi, and I know there's probably a couple people here in the room that are notating my IP address and are already launching a hack attack. I'm just teasing, Tom. But right here you can see right in the middle of the screen the wireless LAN adapter running on Wi-Fi and my IP version 4 address, which is a numeric number starting with the number 10. Okay. Those of you that are familiar with networking infrastructure and addressing schemes will instantly recognize that any IP address that starts with the number 10 refers to what?
Virtual.
Right. And it's really what the way I think of it is an internal addressing scheme. So the IP address there, if I step foot off this campus or if I tried to access it from my phone with the Wi-Fi turned off, I would never be able to touch that address because it's behind a firewall on a private network.
Yeah, anytime it's prefixed with 10, you know that that's not the physical IP address.
Right. And there's a few other address ranges that fall into the same category. There's the 127s, the 172s, the 168s. There's a few of them. And if you study networking, you get to learn these things. But the way that our computers work on the internet, right? If you're trying to access a website, you go to your browser and you type in a name, right? So I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to type Yahoo, okay? Now, even though the name in the address bar says yahoo.com, .com being the top level domain, right? And there's a lot of different top level domains. We'll look at those too. And then Yahoo is actually the domain name. The www is kind of like a virtual subdomain name. And it's really kind of a legacy from times in the past when we would be on the internet and we would try to access different types of servers. And at one point, believe it or not, www was like the new thing. Prior to that, there were things like Gopher and Archie and FTP and like these other things. So like often you would see those at the beginning, and then when the web protocol came out, they would go www, so now you were connecting to a web server, right? For all intents and purposes, that prefix www is pretty useless. So like if you're like typing up a business card and you're putting www on it, forget it. All right, it's not really necessary. But now what happens is when we type this in plain text, this is not the way the networks work. Networks work on numeric addressing schemes. So we type that in, we press enter, then that gets sent off to a domain name server somewhere where it looks it up and goes, aha, Yahoo is this number, and takes you there. That's how it works, right? So in order for you to be able to get any traffic to your machine out on the internet that's publicly accessible, you either have to know that numeric address to type to get to it, or you have to get a domain name. And nobody sits there and memorizes IP addresses except for, real geeks who work with the same machine all the time. Like I could tell you the IP addresses of most of my machines at home, like if you really care to know, because they always, they reserve and they come up with the same thing. Isn't that a great picture of Trump right there? All right. So I'm going to demonstrate here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run a simple little ping command on Yahoo. So I'm going to type ping.yahoo.com, and when I do that, it will go out to the domain name servers, find that Yahoo actually is 98.13.180.149. It rolls off the tongue real smooth like that. I got it memorized, and it sends out a signal and the machine responds. So our job now is for Aaron's dad's business that we come up, first of all, we have to come up with a domain name, and then we're going to purchase it. Okay? And I want you to notice I'm not buying hosting first. I'm buying the domain name first. In fact, if you ever come up with a good business idea for something, or you think of like a really cool website name, I would encourage you at some point in time to plop down the money and buy that name if like well in advance of actually even doing the project. And if you don't want it in the future, you can always let it go. But the domain names do fit into some categories here. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of Googling stuff, and I'm going to use my favorite source of information, which is Wikipedia, of course, the one that all the academics tell you not to use. But it is a really good source of information, at least for getting to the information that you really want. But I want to talk about what top-level domain names are first so that you understand what we're contending with. Now, my hope is that in general you have learned about this stuff. So if I just bark out, what is a top-level domain? Give me an example of one. .com. That's the one that everybody wants. When you get a business, you want whatever you have, .com. Right? But guess what's happened over the years? Yeah, everybody's like purchased up all the good available names. And originally, when they came up with this structure, and I know somewhere down the page here they have lists. That's what I'm kind of searching for. And of course they don't. So, all right, maybe they have it on a separate page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it easy on myself. All right. And what I'm looking for here now is this original list. When the internet was first developed, they did have some conception that we might have to have something in the form of categories, right? Like what categories things will fit into. So .com was the one that we typically will use for commercial interests. We have .orgs, .net, .int, most people don't know about that one, .edu, obviously that's us, .gov, .mil, but we also had these infrastructure ones for .arpa. Those are really ones that most of us will never even see or touch. But those are the ones that we started with. Very quickly, they started to discover that they were going to run out, and they also had some thought, okay, well, what are we going to do when we start to make this stuff international, right? So that's when they started to come up with what they called the country domain extension. So for all the countries on the planet, and I forget how big the list is, 255. Boy, that's a power of 2 almost, isn't it? So every formally recognized country on the planet also has its own 2-letter top-level domain. The United States is not excluded from that, so there is a .us. So if you like scroll through here and look at all these top-level domains and see how they equate to all the different countries, and you can see there's quite a lot of them. I'm kind of scrolling down quickly on purpose now to get down to a couple that I want to point out. One being, of course, US. Yes, some people do get those. Where I see those most often is usually like school systems, where they're going to have like maybe like Racine.wi.wi. Whatever, you know, they to US, and they break it down that way. But there are some countries, and Tuvalu is one of those, that had their top-level domain is .tv, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen websites, usually from TV networks, that have a .tv extension. So some countries, because they're so small, they sell their, that's one way they make money, is they sell their country code, you know, to make a little extra money. All right. Now the other one that I kind of bopped past really quick, and I don't know if I see that here, or maybe they have it towards the bottom. All right, so you guys, I'm sure you guys are wondering, well, if I was actually in Armenia and I wanted to type my extension, how would I type it? Well, I guess if you had the keyboard. But you know what the beauty of all this, folks, is? We have the advantage. Everything ultimately kind of boils down to English when it comes to this stuff. You know, it all gets translated. So those are all those. And we are now in the era of what we call generic top-level domains. And there's certain ones that are pre-created, right? So when you go out and you buy a domain name, everybody wants a .com when you do a business. I mean, why? I mean, yeah, I mean, that's what you think of. What's your .com, right? And you know, some people will have bought some of the newer ones like .biz or .co that are commercial ones, or they'll just go, well, .com wasn't available, so I got .net, right? And there's really no reason to have to do that anymore. You guys should break the mindset that you have to do that you have to fit into one of those categories. Because if you take a look through some of these generic ones, and this is only a partial list, it shows what firms administer them, but the possibilities. So, for example, I know that I showed you guys, as we were starting the class, some work that my students did maybe a year and a half ago for a place called On the Way Cafe up in Mequon. And when they were looking to get the name, of course, onthewaycafe.com was already taken, as are many of the common phrases. So it was a little bit of a hard sell, but we convinced the client, why don't you just get ontheway.cafe? And they did, and that was a smart choice. And what's neat about these is not only can you buy one that fits what you do, it is also possible to create your own if you're willing to pay the money for it. I forget what the cost is. It's a little bit of money, but if you wanted to have one, let's say, with your last name, you could do it. Now, getting people to conceptualize that they should be able to click on that and go to your website, different story. So it does take a little bit of educating of your customers, if you're doing a business, and I'm not saying that we should get Roman.bath, but that would be a possibility. So that's something we want to consider. So really our first step right now is to think of a domain name that we can purchase and then to see if it's available. And then see what kind of a deal we can get and what firm we would go with. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually visit a site that I use to at least do the research part of it. Okay, and way at the bottom down here, there is this little link called Whois. And if you guys aren't familiar with that, in fact, I'll bring up a separate tab here. If you just type this as a phrase, Whois without a space in there, it will take you to a whole list of different databases, but the master database that holds all the domain names for all the named websites on the planet is through ICANN. ICANN is an organization that for many years was controlled by United States interests, started at the University of North Carolina, and was the main registry for all the websites. The U.S. took control of it from a governmental standpoint, so it came out of the hands of education, went into the hands of the government, and then about a year ago, or thereabouts, they released U.S. control over it. And a lot of internet people were really kind of freaking out about it. It's like, oh my God, now what's going to happen? Truth is, we still have control of it.
Freaked out because of free speech.
That's part of it. Free speech is part of, I think, why they were freaked out. But also fearing that it could lead to shutdowns of the internet or control by international bodies that we wouldn't care to have control over these things. But nothing like that's really happened. It's really not that big a deal. But what this service does is any website that's owned. So for example, if I type in gtc.edu, you can look it up and see who the owner is. Now, why would you do that? Right, and it's already owned, perhaps. All right, so when you follow little prompts here, you'll see that who's the registrant. Oh, surprise, surprise, it's Gateway. And who's the admin contact? Well, Dan Madsen. Yes, he is the Director of Information Technology here at Gateway. And there's his phone number and his email address. Pretty interesting. So any website that is registered, you can pull up this kind of information on that website through this service called Whois. And that's a really old, I'm not sure if it technically falls into a protocol, but it's a really old system for looking things up. Well, isn't that interesting? Gateway runs its own domain name servers as well. They should, with IP version 6 on them. All right, let's go back now to this site here, and now we're at the point where we need to start coming up with some ideas for names. So, before we start typing stuff in here, I am pausing this video. And we're going to have a little bit of a discussion because I'm not sure that it's great fodder for the video to hear what our ramblings are. So we are taking a short pause and we'll come back with the exciting conclusion. Oh, darn, it didn't pause. All right, well, so we had some discussions here in class about what an optimum domain name is, and it turns out that the actual name of the business is Roman Bath Soaps. So we just simply typed in romanbathsoaps.com and did a search and did come up with the fact that it is available. And in fact, we already kind of like added it to the cart here. But the thing that you guys should be aware of is whenever you're shopping for this stuff, always look for the little catches and asterisks and stuff. And on this particular site, if you look at the asterisks, and they have a little link here at the bottom, a single one indicates that there's an additional fee of 18 cents per domain per year that goes to ICANN, the registry. So it pays for them to do the maintenance on it, in essence. Now, this is not the only source for getting domain names. In fact, in the old days, some of the real popular ones were Network Solutions. That was one of the big ones. The other one was registry.com. And as far as I know, they're still both active. And how do you like that one? Wow. www. Oh, wow. Or is it register.com? Is that it? All right, so basically, there's many different places to do that, and you're going to find that most of these that sell domains also sell hosting and many of the same services. Here's another real popular one, HostGator. And if you really start digging in, you're going to see that pricing is very similar. At times, you'll see things like this. For example, when we do get to the hosting part of it, where they'll have loss leader pricing for the first year. And one of the catches for those typically is that you prepay for the whole year. There's other sites whose scheme is you get the domain name free if you buy the hosting, or if you buy the hosting you get the converse is true. So you got to kind of shop around and look at different things. Here's another one, Bluehost. That's a very popular one. All right, but since we've kind of already resolved to take this path here, we were going to do romanbathsoaps.com. That one is already selected. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to continue on to the cart, and we're going to have some choices to make here. And at some point, I will actually pause the video so the actual client who's here in the classroom can put in their payment information without it getting stolen in the video, obviously. All right. Now, one thing that all the hosts will offer you these days is this this privacy option for your registration. Now, remember when we looked up the gateway information, how the gateway information, you could see who registered it, how to get a hold of them, real email addresses, real phone numbers. Some people are not comfortable with that. They don't want their names out there. So what they'll do is they'll turn on privacy, and then that information is actually obscured from public view. And that's really kind of an optional thing. You can see it's an extra, and it says as low as $8.95 a domain, and that's one of those where I would watch to see what the price would be the second year, because you never know, it could be higher. At this point, I'm going to leave it to no thanks. That's something you can always turn on if you choose. All right. And then the next thing they try to do is sell you on hosting and other options, because they're figuring, well, if you're getting a domain name, you probably want to host it. So that's something that we, I guess, haven't fully discussed yet, and we probably will take a little sideline and do that. But at this point, we could add it if we wished. And you can see that a lot of these larger hosting companies, what they do is very often they'll try to bundle other products in with it. And I was just cautioning the class, we know we're going to build a WordPress website. It doesn't mean you should get WordPress specific hosting. And most of the big hosts offer that. The reason for that is because very often when you choose that option, it limits your ability to do something else. Because what if you decide later, I don't want to use WordPress, but I still want to use my hosting, and you're kind of locked in. Or the fact that it kind of limits some of the things you can do, like adding email users and FTP users and accessing your file system and your databases and running cron jobs and all these like fancy little server things that you do on the back end that common users really don't think about. So I would caution you in that. Many of the sites will have their own website creation tools. Like you see those like TV commercials where people build websites on app tools and click here, click there, choose a template, choose a color theme, upload some pictures, type some text, and boom, you got a website. I would caution you on using those tools as well. Those tools typically are available for free anyhow, but you can see what they're trying to do here is get people that don't know what they're doing the ability to build a website and charge you a little more for it. Per month. So I'm not a fan. So I try to caution people on that because, everybody's got to make a buck, right? And I would caution you on choosing those options. The ones that they have in the drop-down boxes by default are not ones that you necessarily really have to worry about. And then you're going to notice something that's interesting too, right? They're also going to try to sell you an email. Caution once again, right? It is possible, if you already have a website, that you can get your email service from a site other than the site where you're hosted. But the truth is when you use an economy Linux hosting and you have a cPanel control panel, it's a type of software, you can create as many email accounts as you want without paying extra. But they don't tell people that. Okay? So what you see here is just another way that they're trying to make a couple extra bucks.
That last thing you just said?
Which thing is that?
About, what were you saying about emails?
Right, well, like notice here, like I'm at a screen right now that they want me to add email to my domain.
It's reliable and already.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. But the truth is, if you get an economy level hosting and cPanel, and the reason why a lot of these big hosts stayed away from cPanel for years is because cPanel gives you the capability of creating email accounts attached to your domain right within the product. So you don't need to buy it as an extra service.
Gotcha.
Often there might be a cap on it. Usually the cap with email is how much email you can send per day before you get to the point where you're spending money. So now at this point, we were kind of looking at the hosting plans before. And I don't want to sign in right now. I don't know why it's doing that to me. Maybe because it doesn't have... See, I want to bring this up in a separate tab. We can come back to the cart, I suppose. But if we look at the different levels of hosting that are available, this is similar to what a lot of other websites offer. And we were having this discussion before class too. Now, for those of you that are students and you're getting into this field and you want to experiment with building a lot of different websites, I would encourage you to think about getting probably the middle option. And the reason is pretty simple. Look how many websites you can load on it for that price. And that's a lot of websites, right? Unlimited. So you could take on an unlimited number of projects, personal or for hire, and load them all onto your hosting without paying any extra money. And charge people for it, if you wish. It's kind of an interesting thought. And remember what I was telling you about the email accounts? Notice that there's 100 email accounts that are included through cPanel. Chances are most small organizations never need that many email accounts. All right. So if I were to suggest something, I would suggest economy hosting for this project, unless you plan on being the master of the domain and then loading other websites, Aaron. And that I ask you as a question.
Not at the moment, no. This is specifically for my dad.
Okay.
I promised him I would do this a long time ago, and I can do it. And I feel bad, and I want to have some help with it as well.
Okay.
So, specifically, I want this for my dad because he's doing really well, and he's going to be moving up. So I want him to have a website so he can actually get more clientele.
Okay. And I think then this would be the wise choice. Now, I'm noticing here that they're not offering a month-to-month option, and there's no discount for different levels of service. So I'm not actually going to select it from this screen. I'm actually going to go back to where we were. And see if we can choose here. All right, so I'm going to set economy hosting for $8 a month. We have the domain name. We're choosing not to get the privacy. We're choosing not to add email. But they're happy to charge you for something you get for free anyhow. God bless America. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click continue to cart. And then we're going to start looking at the options that are listing here. Now I want you to see the price tag that's popping up here. And what you have to keep in mind is when you buy the domain name, that's an annual cost. It's a recurring cost that happens every year. So every year you have to renew it. You will get a notification. You have to go in and pay for it. If the name passes the expiration date, so it will be like today is, what's today? The 3rd of October. So if the 3rd of October 2018 lapses, you have 30 days from that date to still pay for the domain and retain it. After that point, it's up for grabs. So that's something that you should know. The other thing is with the hosting, I don't know if you want to go and pay for the whole year in advance or if you want to pay for it month to month.
I'll be for the year for now because I know we're going to be doing a lot of stuff during the summer.
Okay.
Fix everything, put the actual products on the site. So.
Does the price change at all if you do like 3 months or something like that, though? Something like that?
So, sometimes on this particular website, no. And then what you're looking at here, folks, is a pretty realistic cost per year for an economy Linux hosting with a domain name. Usually the range is like $100 to $120. That's a fair and reasonable price. And you know, if it seems like a lot of money, I always tell people, you know, compare it to Yellow Page advertising days of old, where you get like a 1-inch ad and you're paying like a couple $100 a month. And I got to the point where it was just money wasted. And this is actually money that can easily be, you know, turned into profit and earned back. In fact, many times over. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause the recording and we're going to go through the process here of paying for this and getting it registered and getting it live and active. And then I'll come back and resume the video and we'll take a look at the panel up and running, and we'll even get to the point where, since we know we're going to install WordPress. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back shortly.